I'm presenting a delightful game played by young Paul Morphy, one of the greatest chess prodigies, against his father, Judge Alonzo Morphy. He's only 13 years old at the time of this game, and he's playing with a handicap. He won't have the rook on a 1 against his father. But you must understand that Paul Morphy is a chess prodigy. At just 9 years old, he was already considered the best player in New Orleans. So much so that I'll tell you this anecdote. It's quite amusing. It's about General Scott, who was passing through New Orleans, and while dining with some notables, he asked for a chessboard and a worthy opponent. He considered himself a very good player. And when he's offered a game against young Paul Morphy, who was only 9, I remind you, at the time of the game against General Scott, he takes offense. He takes it as a bad joke. And then he agrees to play anyway. He's going to lose both games, so much so that he'll leave the party and go to bed, quite offended and a bit of a sore loser. Then, what is chess? It's a game of brilliance and ruin where elo and pride culminate. Unfortunately, that's often the case. But let's get back to this game that interests us, where Paul Morphy is only 13 and playing against his father. He starts with the pawn on e4. His father responds with e5, knight f3 attacking the central pawn, knight c6 defending, and bishop c4 pointing at the weakness of the pawn on f7. We know that in openings this pawn is quite fragile, quite weak, because only the king defends it. And here, Paul Morphy's father plays knight f6, attacking the pawn on e4. Now we could defend this pawn, but Paul Morphy, who is down a rook, will decide to launch a quick attack. He plays knight g5. And he joins the knight with the bishop in the attack on the pawn on f7. And of course, he wants to play. Knight takes f7 with the fork to queen and rook. So how should black defend? Well, they must intercept the bishop, and they play d5. That's what was played in the game. Well played. Paul Morphy takes, and here, Paul Morphy's father will retake with the knight. Usually, this position exists, it's called the fried liver attack, the attack on f7. And this variation exists, but black should rather play knight f5 to get rid of the bishop, so it can't stay on that diagonal. Because even if it retreats to b3, we could take it. And so that's the usual variation when, of course, white has rook on a 1. But here white doesn't have the rook on a 1. So knight f5 is still possible, but Paul Morphy's father decides to play. Knight takes d5. But by playing knight takes d5, he exposes himself to the knight sacrifice on f7. And that's what he'll do. Paul Morphy, the fried liver sacrifice. Knight takes f7. Even though he's down a rook, he sacrifices his knight on f7. His father takes. And the idea of the sacrifice on f7, of course, is to draw out the king and expose it to the queen's attacks. Now, often when I show this position to my students, they suggest queen h5 check, but queen f3 is more precise. It attacks the king and doubles the pressure on the knight, which, I'll remind you, is pinned. And so if black doesn't want to give back the piece, they must bring the king to e6 to protect the knight. And here Paul Morphy continues to hit where it hurts, attacking the d5 knight, which is pinned. So he triples the attacks on the knight on d5. He's down 2 pieces, but the black king is exposed and the knight is under attack. Here Paul Morphy's father decides to counterattack with knight d4, attacking the queen and attacking the pawn. We could have looked at other moves, but if we analyze this position with computers, we see that knight d4 is the best choice for black. Yet it allows Paul Morphy to win back a piece. But he's still down a rook, but he plays knight takes bishop check. And here there's no question of taking back with the queen, since the queen could take back under the knight's protection. So the king moves aside. And look at what Paul Morphy does. He's going to weave his web. He's going to weave his mating net. He plays queen f7, to deprive the white king of escape squares while protecting the bishop and preparing knight e4 checkmate. And yes, the arrival of this knight on e4 would indeed be checkmate. It attacks the king. It controls the black square c5. The bishop and the queen control all the other squares, and the bishop would be protected by the queen. So it would indeed be a mate. So how is Paul Morphy's father going to defend himself? I invite you to pause the video to try and find the right defensive move for black. What would you play? What did you think of for the black? How to defend against this threat of knight a4 mate? In the game, this is where Paul Morphy's father is going to make his first mistake. He's going to play bishop e6. In reality, the best move was queen e7. Because after knight e4 check, the king could come to d7 under the queen's protection. Now, it's true that we can play knight c5. Check since the queen cannot take because of the pin, but the king could go and take refuge on d8. So queen e7 is the best move for black here. But Paul Morphy's father, as I told you, is going to make his first mistake. He'll only make two, but the second one will be fatal. He's going to play bishop e6. So Paul Morphy takes. And Paul Morphy's father takes back with the knight, thinking that, after all, he still has an extra piece. And he's gotten rid of the bishop of white squares, which for a while now had been very troublesome. But Paul Morphy plays knight e4 check, and this time it's black's second mistake, the decisive mistake. What should black play in this position? They only have two moves, king d5 or king c6. What would you play? Once again, I invite you to pause the video. Let's try to discover the mistake made by Paul Morphy's father. He played king d5. Yet it's the logical move, because you don't want to come to c6 and let the knight be taken. And yet that's what had to be done. Coming to c6, losing the knight on check, but interposing the bishop. It was the best way to continue the position and not be totally lost. Because in reality, after king d5, black is completely lost. But to achieve it, you need the genius of Paul Morphy. What is he going to play with white here? He's going to play c4 check. He'll attack the king while leaving his knight hanging. So king takes, he takes the knight, he's still down a rook, but look at the black king, how he's pulled out of his position. And it's not over. You're in for more surprises. Now, Paul Morphy's father, he clearly sees that his king has gone for a wander. He's completely lost his way, this black king. So he plays queen d4. He tries to bring back his queen to try and secure the area. But queen g4 check. The king has no other square but to come to d3, right? Queen e2 check. Once again, the king doesn't really have any other square but to come to c2. And there, d3 discovered check. We reveal the queen's lateral attack with this pawn advance. And now, where does the king go? He has the b1 square and the bishop is hanging. Paul Morphy's father took the bishop. And now, how does white deliver checkmate? Do you see it? Not by queen d1, because the king could take on b2. On queen d2, check, the king could come to b1. The move to mate here is kingside castling. It's quite rare, after all, to deliver mate with kingside castling. But you'll tell me the king didn't have to take the bishop. And you're right. The king could have gone to b1. And this time, after kingside castling, there's no immediate mate. But in reality, the mate will come. Here, we prepare the bishop's move so the rook attacks, so the king can take the i2 pawn. But queen c2, in reality, the king will be mated quite quickly in this position. But I'm now putting back the position that actually occurred in the game. It's this mate that Paul Morphy delivered. So what did you think of this young Paul Morphy's play? Nice, right? Paul Morphy, is the star and the tragedy of chess because he had a meteoric rise in the game of chess, an extraordinary trajectory, but it didn't necessarily end very well for him. I've had the chance to tell you about it in other videos, and I'll do so on other occasions for other games. If you liked it, you can leave me some thumbs up, comments, share the video, and support the channel as usual. We'll meet again soon for new adventures on the chessboard. Goodbye, everyone.